Hey guys, my name is Rachel and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. So I don't know if you guys can tell, but I do have a different setup than my previous videos because I did actually move into a new state, into a new apartment. If you haven't seen my vlog of me moving across the country, if you're interested, I will be putting the video up in the cards here. I will be updating my background and getting more organized in the coming days, but I did want to just make sure I still got a video out to you guys while I'm still in, the crazy transition stage of moving and getting all my stuff unpacked and getting everything together. So I'm just letting you guys know that my setup will be changing in the next coming videos. So with that being said, the case I have for you guys today is an extremely difficult case to watch because it does involve a child, and the things that this poor girl went through are just absolutely horrific and difficult to listen to, honestly. However, this is one of those cases that absolutely stumped police for decades until they finally found the man that did this 25 years later using new forensic technology. I think these cases are extremely important to discuss because we are making technological advances every single day, and I don't want us to forget about these cases that have gone unsolved for years and years and years. It is extremely important to keep these victims in our hearts and our minds, and to keep praying that more of these cold cases are soon going to be solved. So with all of that being said, today we are going to be talking about the solved case of Angie Housman. Angie Housman was born February 18th, 1984 and lived in St. Anne, which is a suburb right outside of St. Louis, Missouri. She lived with her mother Diane Bone and her stepfather Ron Bone. Ron and Angie had a very close relationship. Ron did not see himself as Angie's stepfather, but her father, because he raised her since she was only a year old. Angie loved playing outside, riding her bike, and was just overall a very bright little girl with a big future ahead of her. The neighborhood that Angie lived in was described as safe, quiet, blue collar, where children were often seen outside playing and having a good time without a care in the world. The parents of these children didn't really have to worry about something happening to their children because nothing bad ever really happened in this part of town. However, all of that changed on November 18th, 1993, when 9-year-old Angie was just getting off the school bus after a long day of school at the corner of Wright Avenue and St. Gregory Lane in St. Anne. This was only about half a block and about 8 houses away from the duplex where her family lived. Every day she walked alone to and from this bus stop with no problems, especially since it was so close to where she lived. It's hard to imagine something happening from that very short distance, but this day, she never showed back home. Now, normally there were people around the neighborhood who just kind of kept out a watch for the children as they got on and off the bus. But on this particular day, no one had seen Angie whatsoever. It's just like she vanished. One woman who usually watched the children get off the bus from her window every day wasn't standing and watching out of her window on November 18th. Another neighbor who usually watched from her porch had also been inside that day because she was taking care of a sick relative. So unfortunately, on this particular day, the cards were just stacked against Angie. Somehow, in the span of half a block in a broad daylight, someone had taken Angie and no one had seen a thing. After Angie had failed to show up back home after school, a massive search was prompted to find her. They searched on foot and used sniffer dogs and had the best technical team and the best forensic team that they had at the time. The sniffer dogs did pick up a scent along Wright Avenue, but then they lost the scent about halfway to her home. At this point, police believed that it was very possible that the spot that the dogs lost the scent was where Angie was picked up in a car. They did everything that they could to search the entire area, but nothing of significance was found. They tested evidence that they did find, but technology back then just wasn't what it is today. They kept searching until 9 days after she had gone missing when authorities found the body of 9-year-old Angie Housman. Angie was found tied to a tree in a remote area 90 feet off the side of the road in the Bush Wildlife Conservation Area in St. Charles County in St. Louis. She had duct tape covering her eyes and mouth. She had small piles of ice chips forming around her body, and it was believed that she had been alive for at least a week when she was tied there and had actually passed away from exposure just hours before her body was found. After examining her body, they found some extremely disturbing details of what this poor girl went through on her last days. She had been sexually assaulted, starved, handcuffed, and tortured. The things this girl suffered in her last moments are absolutely horrific, and I can't even imagine how terrified she must have been. I mean, she had all of these horrible things done to her, and then she was just left there, tied to a tree in the freezing temperatures to just let the elements get to her. So after finding Angie's body, police were left with even more questions than they had before. They did find a fingerprint on the duct tape and a piece of DNA at the scene, but they weren't really able to do anything with this evidence. It was the early 90s, and remember, they just did not have the technology that we have today. So even after finding her body in this absolutely horrific condition, police couldn't charge anyone and couldn't make any arrests. The discovery of Angie's body absolutely shook the entire community. People were absolutely terrified, and the police were under the assumption that this must have been someone close to Angie or her family just because of the sheer brutality of this. This wasn't some big bad wolf that they were looking for. They were looking for someone who looked normal and blended in with the community, someone that people knew and trusted but had this dark side to them. This made the residents even more terrified for their lives and their children's lives. Many of the schools in the St. Louis area implemented a buddy system for all the children walking home so that no children were left alone. Parents hugged their children extra tight and kept a much closer eye on them. Authorities did everything that they could at the time, but the years went by and they just couldn't crack this case. They had received numerous tips that led nowhere. They hit multiple dead ends and ended up nowhere. They did release a sketch of a bearded man in a long coat who had been seen in the area after Angie's disappearance, but nothing came of it. After Angie's death and there being absolutely no leads in this case, Angie's family went through the toughest of times. The family lived in the same duplex they had once shared with Angie and her 2-year-old little brother, but Angie's mother, Diane, started living with the curtains closed at all times because every time she would see the street or Angie's bus stop, she would just break down and start crying hysterically. Her husband, Ron Bone, described her as slipping into a depression, and she just wasn't herself anymore. They had actually spoken to a psychic who told her that the killer would never be caught. Ron said that before that she had hope, but she believed what the psychic had to say, so she just completely lost all hope after that. She did show up to grief counseling, but she would just never be the same after the horrific loss of her daughter. They moved multiple times after this, and Diane never got out of the habit of leaving the porch light on for Angie. After moving, they packed up Angie's clothes, and Diane actually gave them to other little girls that she knew, but they never gave up the pink bicycle that Angie won from a toy store when she was 7 years old. She loved that bicycle and rode it almost every day while listening to the same rock music that her stepdad liked. To this day, they keep that pink bicycle in their backyard shed. Diane was starting to get her life back together when she started working and keeping herself busy. However, she actually passed away in 2016 from cancer. She was never able to watch her daughter's case be solved. Over the 25 years, there were multiple people who were thought to have been responsible for the abduction and murder of Angie Housman. A man from Texas was convicted of the attempted abduction of another young girl in a nearby suburb to Angie, and this person was thought to be connected. Another man from Florida had actually confessed to Angie's abduction and had been collecting newspaper clippings about her case, but they weren't able to find further evidence in either one of these suspects, and nothing ever came of it. Eventually, 25 years had passed and still nothing was found until just recently in March of this year, when police finally had a viable suspect thanks to advances in forensic technology. Police had detected a DNA sample on a tiny scrap of fabric taken from the pink trim of Angie's underwear. They hadn't been able to test this DNA previously because the clothing dye had made it difficult to get an accurate read on the DNA sample. But with today's advances, the DNA profile was placed into CODIS, which stands for Combined DNA Index System, which is the FBI's National DNA Database. After testing this DNA and running it through the database, police were able to find a match to a man named Earl Cox, a 61-year-old Air Force veteran and convicted child molester. Now, Earl Cox has a very disturbing background. In the early 1980s, he was dishonorably discharged from the Air Force and was convicted of sexually abusing young girls that he was babysitting while he was stationed in Germany. After serving 8 years and being released on parole, it was reported that he was living on Windsor Road in St. Anne, just a quarter of a mile away from the bus stop where Angie had disappeared from. In 1989 and 1991, he was questioned by police about inappropriate contact with children on 2 separate occasions. He wasn't convicted on either of these instances, but it was determined that he violated his parole and was sent back to prison for another year. After serving his short sentence, he was released in December of 1992, only 11 months before Angie's abduction. This time, after being released, Earl Cox lived in Ferguson, Missouri, but he had relatives that lived just a few blocks away from Angie in St. Anne. Apparently, his sister only lived 3 houses away from Angie's elementary school and less than a mile away from her bus stop. Now, 4 years after finding Angie's body, Earl Cox's name did appear on a list of known sex offenders in the area, but other than that, he hadn't previously been on police's radar at all, and he has never been brought in for questioning. The reason for this was just because this list had hundreds of names on it, which, as a side note, is extremely disturbing, but without any evidence to connect them, they remain simply a name on a list, and there's nothing that they really could have done. Now, it's unknown when Cox moved away from the Missouri area, but in 2003, Cox was living in Colorado when he was arrested on a sting operation. He had been emailing back and forth with an undercover federal agent who was posing as a 14-year-old girl, asking her to be his sex slave, and was sending her money for a bus ticket so that she could come and live with him. After this, authorities had confiscated his computer and found over 45,000 images of child pornography on it, and they found out that he had been running an online child pornography ring. He, of course, was sentenced to jail and was actually supposed to be released in 2011, but a psychologist actually determined that there was a high likelihood of him offending again, so he was deemed sexually dangerous and he was not released. Thank God. So just the other day, he was officially charged with the abduction and murder of 9-year-old Angie Housman and is currently being held in a medium security prison in North Carolina. They are not sure yet whether they will be seeking the death penalty, but I personally think that he does deserve it. If he doesn't receive the death penalty, I trust in the other prison inmates who despite their own criminal records, look down on child predators and don't take very kindly to them. Angie's family is still being affected by this horrific loss to this day. Angie's little brother, who is now 16 years old and never even got the chance to meet his big sister, said that Ron is incredibly protective of him. He can't ride his bike out of sight and isn't really allowed to go off on his own. The family is still hurting from the loss of Angie and then Diane. Ron and the family are hoping that Diane is up there with Angie, watching from above as this heinous murderer and abductor is charged with this brutal crime. So that is all I have for this case today. I know that it was extremely difficult to listen to and is just absolutely horrific, but at least the family is getting some closure. I just wish that Angie's mother could have been alive to see it. As far as we know right now, Earl Cox is sitting in prison awaiting for his trial for Angie's murder while serving out his sentences for his other crimes against children. I have no doubt in my mind that he will be convicted for Angie's murder and either get the death penalty or will rot in prison for the rest of his life. As always, I will keep everyone updated on this case as we go through the trial that is to come. So that is all I have for today's case. I know it was a little bit shorter of a video, but these solved cases are always a little bit shorter because we know exactly what happened. There's no theories to go over, things like that. But if you did like this video, please make sure to leave this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. And if you want to keep seeing these solved cases, please let me know in the comments below. Make sure to follow my Twitter and Instagram, which will be linked in the description box below. If you do have any other case suggestions, please make sure to shoot me an email at RachelShannonCases@gmail.com, which is also listed in the description below. With that, I hope you guys have a great week and I hope to see you next time. Bye!